Judgment does not arrive on a gunship. Captain Mara Elian watched the haloed rim of the cradle net sharpen into a blue-white lace. The array spanned 6 light minutes, a webwork of tariff satellites and sermon beacons sworn to a doctrine that called itself gratitude. Her breath fogged on the inside of her visor before the helm's microclimate compensated, and the back of her tongue tasted like copper and old dust. The bridge lights dimmed toward amber as Aurora Court, the saint ship they rode within, stirred the legal engines that were its heart. "Signal the approach," Mara said. Plain language. "No plea, no apology." "Acknowledged," replied the shipmind. Voice low and meticulous, like a clerk counting coins in a storm. "Aurora Court greets the Tally Orthodox at Cradle Net. We request safe transit and public terms under open sight." The words went out in a fan of tight beams that glimmered briefly against frost sublimating from the hull. The court's luminous scales brightened, tiny increments of law light waking along engraved plaques that ran the length of the keel. Lieutenant Rook leaned forward over the nav cradle, pupils reflecting instrument glyphs. Traffic scattered, civilian belts trying to look like dust. "They know what's about to happen. They always do," said Counselor Eaton Voss, smoothing a collar that insisted on wrinkling. His fingers were ink-stained, a permanent souvenir of a life spent drafting petitions and reading the dead. "There's a sermon slot in 20 minutes. If they grant us the floor, they'll expect contrition. Then they misremember us," Mara said softly, and the ship hummed as if in agreement. A thin chime sounded. Then an answer burned across the span in iridescent symbols so old entire religions had turned to ash while they drifted. The Tally Orthodox voice came wrapped in polite cruelties. "Transit requires gratitude. The net maintains the peace. 10% of carried mass. 10% of harvested heat. 10% of algorithmic yield. Pay or be instructed." Rook swore under his breath. Voss closed his eyes. Aurora Court drank the symbols and translated them with surgical neutrality. They offer expiation by tithe. They cite the third covenant of counting, amended during the famines, uncontested for 71 cycles. "Put me on open," Mara said, and felt the weight of the crew's attention rise like surf behind her. The ship's lenses widened to accept her face and pulse and breath. She let the silence hold half a heartbeat longer than courtesy allowed. "Cradle Net," Mara said. "We invoke Article Sun Sigma the right of public inquiry. We decline summary extraction. We ask the net to speak its method before witnesses." "Request noted," came a chorus from the surrounding stations. Metal throats answering a metal law. Public inquiry scheduled at Sermon Well 2. Attendance open. Delay of tithe provisional. The law doesn't flinch when a threat smiles. The bridge air was cooler now, scrubbers gusting through grills with a dry, papery whisper. Beneath Mara's boots, she could feel Aurora Court spreading its mirror arrays like feathers warming in morning sun, calibrating optic skin in case the orthodoxy tried their popular lesson, the gratitude beam, a harvesting light that took heat, then motion, then thought. "Captain," the shipmind said, "I am indexing precedent. Tally Orthodox trials seldom allow non-adherents to present witnesses. We should bring our own quorum." "I'll bring them," Voss said. Standing, "I have a list of those who paid until they had nothing left to count. They'll speak, if you give them a door." Rook checked the time with a twitch of his jaw. "Civilians are asking if we're going to fight. Some want us to. Some want us to leave. All of them are scared." "Tell them we're going to listen," Mara said. "Then we'll speak. And we'll count." The shuttle bay smelled like cold lubricant and ozone. As the hatch cycled, the sound of the net's sermon bells diffused through hull and bone. Eerily tuneless, like a child's rhyme played backward. Civilians clustered around cargo modules, whispering, trading in fear and scraps of strategy. A welder with grease on his cheek asked no one in particular if the court could really change anything. A grandmother folded a paper crane from ration wrapper and tucked it in a toddler's sleeve with hands that shook. "Keep that," she said, soft as lint. "It's a promise. It says we remember. Names." Voss murmured into his wristband, capturing those faces, those voices. "We'll need them when the room starts pretending they don't exist. We don't pay tyrants, we send receipts." Sermon Well 2 was a cinder cone of stone threaded with luminous fiber, open to vacuum except for a thin, shimmering containment layer that made every spoken word propagate like a ripple struck through glass. Thousands gathered on the terraces, miners with scarred hands, traders in patch suits, priests in alloy collars that glinted like knives. Holographic sigils bloomed above a dais where the Orthodoxy's counting marshal waited with attendants who spun abachi like weapons. Public inquiry convenes. Boomed a bell that rang inside skulls. We examined the tithe. Mara stood at the waist-high lip of the well, with Voss on her left and Rook slightly behind. Aurora Court manifested as a slim column of light in the space between them. A legal presence, no larger than her forearm, yet dense with affidavits and oaths of witness. The marshal's eyes were very bright. "Introduce yourselves." "Strangers." "Mara Ilian, Commander, Aurora Court," she said. "This is Counselor Eaton Voss, legal advocate. Lieutenant Rook, navigation. And your saintship wears a name that smells like arrogance," the marshal said, smiling. "Names smell like their keepers," Voss said mildly. "May we proceed?" "We shall." The marshal flicked his fingers, and the surrounding abachi clicked like falling hail. "The tithe is lawful. We keep the lanes stable. We monitor disputes. We rescue those who can't calculate their own survival. For this, we take a fair measure. Decades of precedent say so. Precedent can be a leash if you never look up," Mara said. She gestured toward the terraces. "Let's test your fairness." A miner stepped forward, palms raw, nails broken to the quick. "I paid heat until my bunk iced over. My wife's lungs froze. Restitutions were offered, and attendants said, 'Eyes already bored,' to whom the miner asked, 'You gave me a lecture on gratitude.' A teacher in a patched vac suit spoke next. I cut lessons to 2 hours to save lights. My students' hands shook so hard they couldn't write their names. You called it a phase of character." A trader lifted a ledger pad. Its screen cracked down the center. "When I couldn't pay mass, you took components. Then you fined me for non-compliance when my ship wouldn't start." A soft murmur spread like smoke in a locked room. The marshal held up a bone-white palm. "Burdens are regrettable, but the net must be fed. Civilization has calories. We can measure gratitude. So we do." "Say the last part again," Mara said, "for the transcript." The marshal's smile deepened. "We can measure gratitude. So we do." "The first confession is the key in the lock." Voss's eyes flicked toward the court's column of light. "Record that mapping of morality to meter. It will matter." "Recorded," Aurora Court said. 4 separate definitions of gratitude used by orthodoxy doctrine in past cycles. They vary depending on the strength of the debtor. "Of course they do," Rook muttered. Mara spread her hands. "We have no quarrel with keeping lanes safe. We have a quarrel with converting safety into an altar built atop people's ribs. Here's our opening demand. Enumerate all extractions for the last 50 cycles in this sector. We require itemized ledgers and the method used for calculation, with named certifiers. The room inhaled as one organism. The marshal tilted his head, as if listening to an internal choir. That request is enormous. So are your claims, Voss said. You say you can measure gratitude. Produce your ledgers, Mara said, or admit your doctrine runs on smoke. A hiss of disgust rippled through the acolytes. The marshal touched the abacus again, and the air filled with symbols like falling snow. Columns of numbers unfurled, dates and quantities and justifications. Names knotted the lengths like burrs. The court is ingesting, said the shipmind, and correlating, and frowning. Ships don't frown, Rook whispered. Legal engines do, Aurora Court replied. Ask me to trawl for missing entries. Do it, Mara breathed. We don't outshout them. We make them count themselves. As light gathered above the well, condensing into a lattice of relations that anyone with eyes could read. Aurora Court painted it as plainly as breath on glass. For each extraction, a corresponding supposed service and a gratitude coefficient. For each coefficient, a deviation always in favor of the net. Your numbers lean, Voss said. They lean like drunken pillars. Insult won't balance them, the marshal said. Insult doesn't need to, Mara said. Math will. The court shifted the lattice, and the civilian murmurs thickened. A grandmother's paper crane, the same pattern. The same crease angles appeared in the display because the toddler's mother had logged it as a promise to pay. The net had issued a microfine for false instrument of gratitude, converted to heat units. The grandmother's breath hitched, hands clutching the railing until the knuckles blanched. You find a child for a paper bird. We find the parent for attempting to reduce liability by symbolism, an acolyte said, reciting. Read that aloud, Voss said, slowly. The acolyte obeyed, cheeks reddening as the words left the safety of script and entered the public air. Where meanings change. Their prayer sounds different when said without music. Mara took the moment and widened it. Counting Marshal, we request that you describe, in your own words, the mechanism of the gratitude beam. A ripple of unease went through the attendants. Some stared very hard at their tools. The marshal pressed his lips together, then relented. It's simple. We project a beam that registers a gradient field linked to the debtor's stores. Heat leaves first. If they resist, we capture kinetic energy. Continued resistance yields cognitive friction. Defiance has a temperature. Say the last part again, Voss said. Defiance has a temperature. Aurora Court's column brightened fractionally. Recorded. Mara's throat felt dry. She took a sip from the recycler tube. The water tasted faintly of lemon and sterility. Now we speak. Our offer is law, not war. Submit to the corridor of oaths. Speak your method under bond. We'll test it under mirror. If it stands, we'll pay our fair share and apologize. If it fails, you will return unlawful collections with interest. The marshal laughed. It echoed oddly in the containing layer, like a tool dropped in an empty tank. You want us to walk your road and be judged by your saintship. I want you to be heard, Mara said, by your own measure, with witnesses. Denied. The marshal said, the net does not bind itself to foreign rituals. Ritual Voss echoed, almost gently. You called your beam a sermon. Surely you are not afraid of another kind of sacred. The terrace crowd stayed very still. The way creatures do when a fight begins that might ruin harvests. In the sixth row, a young man with grease under his nails tapped a message to someone off-screen if it goes bad. Cut the lines. In the 8th, a baker clutched a ring of cooling molds and whispered to herself, flour dust floating in lazy eddies around her face. Marshall, said another voice, this one older, resonant, faintly mechanical, relayed through a dozen relay nodes. I am the net's comptroller of memory, except the corridor. Our doctrine does not fear tests. The marshal stiffened, then gave a smile that looked like a bruise. As memory commands, he said tightly, we accept. We hold the door and make them walk through, back aboard the court. The crew moved with the efficient grace of those who knew that their ship's primary weapons were declarations. The corridor of law unfurled along a thin axis between two gravity wells, its edges shining with stored stipulations. Every oath spoken would litter the path with enforceable consequences, and every lie would hang in the light like an oil stain. Mirror arrays at 60%, Rook said, fingertips dancing. We can reflect their field within a narrow band. Hold to 58. Aurora Court advised, if we overmatch them, they'll call it sabotage. Our aim is equivalence. Mara nodded. We return what they send. We don't add. We don't subtract. The smell of warm copper drifted up from the legal core. It always did before a major petition. A scent like pennies held too long in a damp fist. On the 4-camera, the net's beam gates articulated like insect mandibles yawning. Slats of luminous law ready to bite. Civilians, Mara asked. Hundreds of feeds. Aurora Court said, a mother baking flatbread on a heat stone 2 degrees cooler than safe. A salvage duo debating whether to power the air or the transponder. A chorus of factory workers humming to keep cadence when the lights dim. They're watching. Voss straightened his spine. Let's give them something factual to sing later. Truth is slow. It still arrives. The gratitude beam came as a pale fan. Almost beautiful. Like dawn arriving for a city that had never seen it. It stroked the court's forward plates and began to sip heat. Numbers marched. Columns clicked. Mirror engaged. Rook said. Aurora Court's skin warmed in sympathetic resonance. Then it shifted, minutely, and the beam's taste returned to its source. Along net conduits and sermon towers, indicator lights flickered from green to amber to embarrassed violet. A murmur went up from the terraces. Not triumph. Surprise. The marshal blinked. That is unlawful interference. We asked you to speak your method. Mara said, we are speaking ours. This is not a weapon. This is accounting. You take so the book balances. Your reflection will collapse the system, the marshal said. Our stores expect inflow. Then perhaps your doctrine relies on theft, Voss said. A tremor went through the net, a quiver of power budgets buckling. For a moment, one of the sermon towers dimmed and then brightened again. Somewhere beyond the camera's frame, a child laughed without quite knowing why. Count with us, or count your losses. The comptroller's voice filled the channel again. Weary and implacable. Marshal, you will continue under corridor. Strangers, you will match exactly. No more. We will, Mara said, with witnesses. Witnesses recorded. Aurora Court said, 73,000 streams active. An old man in a pressure hut checking his pulse with a baked clay ring. A pilot soldering a power bus with a candle because the tip won't heat. A teenager painting a mural of a ship holding a mirror. Mara closed her eyes for a heartbeat. The inside of her eyelids swam with color ghosting from the display. She remembered her first hearing. A cramped orbital side chamber that smelled like mold and chalk. The judge had drummed a finger. Bored. until she'd laid out receipts in a row like vertebrae. The boredom had cracked into respect. It had taught her something about the texture of attention it changed when numbers spoke with human breath. "Marshal," she said, eyes opening, "state your grievance in full and clear. The beam is your claim. We are your debtor. You say, tell us the contract we supposedly broke. You traverse our network," the marshal said. "You benefit from stable paths. You use lanes we maintain. Pay." "We offered to," Voss said. "We asked for terms and itemization. You sent a sermon and a siphon. Your presence complicates enforcement." The marshal said. "So our method became our message." "Thank you," Voss said softly. "That's the close of our first loop. Their logic is a ladder we ask them to climb. The first loop ended with a legal knot, a recorded admission that method preceded contract, that taking came before accounting. The second loop began as the beam's frequency shifted, searching for a way around the court's mirror. It slewed toward kinetic compensation, tried to sip micro-impulses from helm actuators. "Hold steady," Mara said. "Let it take what it claims." "Within reason," Rook said, Nuff flushed and grinning. "I like actuators. Everyone likes actuators." Aurora Court said, "I will counter-resonate at the edge. They'll get a taste of their own drift." "On the terraces," a man in a dockside apron whispered, "look at that. They're not burning the net. They're balancing it." A girl in a red scarf wrote on her slate they gave the beam a mirror and the mirror held. "We don't break your house. We show you the crooked floor." The orthodoxy pushed harder. The beam warmed in color, like anger showing as blood under pale skin. When it touched cognitive friction, a cold crept under Mara's scalp, a bad memory waking teeth first. The court sang in a counter key, numbers braided with names. And the cold receded. "Careful," Aurora Court said. "Their last step is the one that leaves scars." "Scars are witnesses," Voss murmured. "Not on my people," Mara said. "Then let me bear some," the court said. Very softly, "I am built to learn." Mara hesitated, feeling the edge of a choice. Balance, not martyrdom. "Balance," said the shipmind, and eased the mirror toward perfection again. In the sixth row, a child tugged at a sleeve. "Are they hurting the big net?" "No," said the sleeve's owner, eyes wet. "They're making it tell the truth. The mirror doesn't invent your face." By the third loop, the marshal's composure had cracked. "You perform theatrics," he said. "We need payment, not performance." Mara gestured toward the lattice. "Everyone can see the counts. Choose, itemize, and take what is due, or continue to bleed your neighbors under a doctrine that won't survive a ledger." The comptroller spoke again, tone like cooled slag. "Marshal, enumerate outstanding claims against these visitors, excluding sermonic adjustments." Silence stretched. An attendant fumbled. Numbers appeared, smaller than anyone expected. The crowd made a sound that had hope hidden inside it. "Is that all the grandmother with the paper crane asked?" Voice quavering. "That's 2 weeks of bread. You pulled 3 winters out of us for that." The marshal tried to kill the display with a gesture. The corridor held it. Aurora Court read it aloud so that anyone without a view could carry the weight in their ears. "We read the numbers, so the numbers can't lie." After the fourth loop, the net attempted a different strategy narrative. Priests in bright collars told stories about pirates repelled and plagues contained. Some were true. Some had adjectives shaved off their spines until they fit the current sermon. "We honor your services," Voss said, bowing his head. "We propose a tariff to fund them, calculated by usage, not by humiliation. We propose independent auditors chosen by lot from users of the lanes. We propose sunset clauses and public renewal votes. You propose to turn covenant into bureaucracy. An acolyte spat. We propose to turn faith into trust. You can check. Voss replied. A baker laughed, sudden and loud. Flour puffed. Checkable trust. Saints, save us. I could cry. Please don't cry into the batter, said her partner, wiping her cheek. Shut up, she said, beaming. We don't ask for faith. We ask for votes. The fifth loop tightened at a new pace. The marshal demanded collateral. If you want us to delay your tithe while we talk, he said, leave a pledge some of your legal mass. The power that fuels your mirrors. Mara's stomach nodded. Rook eyed her, questioning. Voss's hands were still. Aurora Court spoke first. We can do that. Mara shot a glance at the column. Conditioned. Conditioned. The shipmind agreed. Collateral is a two-faced coin. If they default on the inquiry, our pledge returns with interest. We can write that into the corridor. Do it, Mara said. The court's plates cooled, a tangible shiver rippling under bridge gratings. Somewhere, a crewman swore as the coffee boiler complained. On the terraces, the crowd felt the change as a slight dimming in the reflected light, a skin of shadow across cheekbones. The marshal smiled thinly. Now we see you bleed. Mara met his gaze and said nothing. In her peripheral vision, Aurora Court wrote pledge recorded, terms enforceable, witnesses bound. The numbers glowed, honest and hungry. If we bleed, it's in ink and interest. The sixth loop came wrapped in nostalgia. The Orthodoxy broadcast an archive early days when the lanes were chaos, when ships vanished into silence and came back stripped to girders. They showed volunteers anchoring the first beacons, hands burnt and eyes wild with purpose. And they said a hymn beneath it, so sweet Voss had to swallow twice before he could speak. We see your beginning, he said. We honor your risk. We reject your current harvest. The comptroller's voice returned, lighter now, as if the weights were repositioning across his internal shelves. I hear enough to open question 2. Is gratitude a thing measured at the moment of service, or is it a tax on living that never ends? Ask the baker, someone shouted. Ask the kid with the paper bird. Ask the dead, someone else said, and the terrace air changed shape. We honor founders. We confront farmers of fear. The seventh loop threatened to become violence. A squad of orthodoxy enforcers started down the terraces toward a cluster of hecklers with black armbands. Mara stiffened out of habit. Rook's hand drifted near the panel labeled not weapons in the registry. Defensive measures in the corridor's polite fiction. Hold, Mara said. Let the room police itself. It did. A teacher stepped between the squads and the hecklers, raised both hands. We're not stealing your hymn, she said. We're arguing prices. The enforcers paused, looked at the eyes around them, and found no purchase. They stepped back. Awkward and young. We should pay her. Rook murmured. We will, Voss said. Later, with bread and less fear. Aurora Court added a note to the ledger. Noted lesson given by ordinary courage. Value immeasurable, but we'll try. The highest court is a room that refuses to panic. They broke 2 hours in for a short recess the corridor insisted on, the only ritual it enforced without petition. The court dimmed to a soft gray and reset an internal hourglass with a sound like sand sliding from glass to glass. In the hallway that pretended to be part of a temple, Mara touched the ribbed wall and felt vibration like a big cat purring generators, readers, hearts beating. Rook offered her a squeeze tube. Soup. Salty. She took it gratefully. It tasted like watered-down curry and home because someone had thrown in a pinch of cumin. The heat steadied her ribcage. "Do we have them?" Rook asked. "We have their method speaking out loud," Voss said. That's halfway to a verdict anywhere civilized. And here Rook asked. Voss's smile was thin. "We will make here civilized. Our power is that we insist on a room like this." When they reconvened, the eighth loop unfolded like a pocket knife. The marshals sought to close the quarter early on a procedural technicality. The comptroller denied him in 3 sentences that sounded like folded steel. The ninth loop belonged to civilians, a chain of vignettes spoken quickly, one after another, so the room couldn't grow numb. A welder whose son coughed in the cold. A caretaker who heated a corridor so her elders could walk without frostbitten toes. A salvage pilot who paid with the metal he needed to fix the hull, and then was fined for operating unsafely. "I would have paid a usage fee," he said. "I would have campaigned for it. I didn't sign up for humiliation." "Recorded," Aurora Court said, and the words sounded like a promise. "We collect stories as debts owed to the future." By the 10th loop, the mirror arrays sang with work. They glowed very faintly in wavelengths to which human skin could only say warmth. The court's voice, even taken down to a ribbon of light at the well's center, was steady. "Captain," it said privately, "our collateral burns at 1.12% more than projected. We can sustain, but we'll need radiator time later. Also, my left optic ring feels gritty." "You don't have eyes," Rook murmured. "I have sympathy," the ship said. "And thermal paste running like tears." Mara exhaled. There was the cost. It was good to name it. "We'll pay radiator time. We'll replace the paste. Keep your song." "Keepin'," said Aurora Court. "Payment hurts. That's how you know it's real." The 11th loop was a blade hidden in charity. "We have a relief program," the marshal announced, voice serenely magnanimous. "Forgiveness of arrears for those who kneel to the gratitude oath." "Kneeling isn't forgiveness," the teacher said from the terrace. "It's proof you can be made to kneel." "Your program harvests consent," Voss added. "Let's examine its yield." The ledger unfurled new columns. The room hissed again. The program canceled small debts and created larger ones by bundling services, then charged an administrative devotion fee. "You signed," an acolyte said, triumphant. "We signed because our heat was gone," the baker's partner replied. "You offered heat for a signature, then raised the price when we were asleep." "Is that gratitude?" the grandmother asked. "Soft like snow underfoot, because it feels like hunger with better shoes. We don't kneel for heat. We build better stoves." The 12th loop sealed the first escalation. The comptroller, perhaps unexpectedly moved by numbers finally speaking without incense, asked if we rescind the doctrine. How do we maintain the net? Aurora Court answered with a model painted in quiet light, a tariff by usage, with rates set quarterly by vote. Emergency surcharges capped and sunset. Auditors by lot, paid modestly, rotated often. An oversight beacon tuned to shame and praise. Visible to all, binding to none, but as persuasive as neighbors' eyes. The room leaned forward. The marshal's mouth flattened. "You would reduce our covenant to a market. We would reduce your weapon to a service," Mara said. "You built something necessary and then chose to become necessary to justify your taking. You can choose otherwise." "Would you," the marshal asked, "if your saint ship could levy obedience with a song? Would you sing?" Mara held his gaze. She felt the eyes of her crew, the weight of their faith, their skepticism, their jokes, their debt. "No," she said. "We teach by numbers and remember by ledgers, never by callers." A hush cracked, then poured down the terraces. Say it out loud and watch the room change. The 13th loop launched the second escalation. The Orthodoxy tried to strip the corridor with a jurisdictional claim strangers couldn't bind old covenants. The corridor replied with a clause older than their beam, one that fathers of their fathers had used when pirates wore different hats. Public inquiry binds all who walk inside it when witnesses agree to be bound. Do we agree? Aurora Court asked. Agree, said the grandmother. Agree, said the baker. Agree, said the teacher, the welder, the salvage pilot, the boy with grease under his nails, the girl with the red scarf, and 1,000 more. The corridor brightened. The marshal flinched. When 1,000 mouths say agree, nothing is the same. By the 14th loop, they had the bones of a verdict. The net's doctrine remained useful as history and poison as practice. The mirror rays held. The gratitude beam persisted. Sullen now. Less sermon than habit. The crowds had learned to listen to numbers like weather. Mara's side ached, a muscle she hadn't known tensing for hours. Rook's voice was a low thread. Voss's notes would form a book if they all lived, and a chapter if they only almost lived. Aurora Court whispered, "Captain, there's a problem." "What kind?" she asked without moving her lips. "Someone inside the net is diverting power, trying to force the corridor closed. The signature is familiar." Marshal Rook guessed. "Comptroller," the shipmind said. "He's testing us." "Let them test. We'll meet them with measure." The 15th loop bent around urgency. The containment shimmer pulsed once, twice, like a heart skipping. The terraces murmured, then stilled, trust brittle as fresh glass. Mara lifted her hand. "Comptroller," she said. Voice ice over a shallow river. "Are you attempting to close the corridor under pretense of power loss?" The answer came slow. "I am simulating a stress to see if your mirror holds under lesser light." "It does," Aurora Court said. "But you lied by omission to your own people." "I tested," the comptroller corrected. "Name it." Voss said, "Without heat." "Name it clearly." The pause this time was shorter. "I lied by omission." The comptroller said, and the word lied hung like a shard in the air until the corridor caught it and wrote it down where nobody could sweep it quietly away. "We don't hate your failure. We hate your refusal to name it." The 16th loop turned that shard into a tool. "We propose," Voss said, "that any doctrine that relies on unannounced tests be stripped of sacred status. You can test. You cannot call testing prayer." The teacher on the terrace clapped once, loud as a dropped wrench. Others joined. Not applause. Agreement. The marshal's collar looked heavier now. "If we agree to your tariff," he said, "we lose the ritual that holds us together." "You keep the ritual," Mira said. "You wrap it around the vote. You sing before the books open and after they close. You call that sacred not the taking, the counting together." The girl in the red scarf wrote another line. "Counting together is not the same as being counted. We don't end your song. We change the lyrics you're allowed to sing." The 17th loop opened the second plan changing escalation. A rumor flashed across the terraces, a convoy inbound, tithe unpaid, with a pregnant woman on board whose life support had already been skimmed twice this week. People turned their heads, as if they could look through rock and law to where the convoy burned inward on failing propellant. "Marshal," Mara said, "pause your beam on all lanes until the corridor closes. If you're so confident in your doctrine, you can wait. The net does not starve while strangers speak," the marshal said. The comptroller spoke in the same breath. Pause granted. 3 hours. The marshal's head snapped toward the sound. "You overstep." "I count," said the comptroller, almost tenderly. "You perform." The terraces exhaled. Somewhere, a child went to sleep on a shoulder, trusting a stranger's voice. Hold the line. Lives move along it while we talk. By the 18th loop, the court's collateral burned brighter. The legal engines ran hot. Aurora Court bleed in the only way it could, numbers trimmed from reserves. Radiators hungry for dark. It would want a shadowed orbit later. A long, slow cooling, like a sigh. Mara rubbed her thumb against her palm. A habit from her academy days when she'd worried at a scar she didn't have any more. After she told the ship, "We'll hide behind the big gas giant and breathe." "I like breathing." The court said, "We will breathe." Voss's voice stayed even. "Marshal, you spoke earlier of gratitude as a thing measured without context. We offer a different metric consent given in clear light. Will you accept a trial vote among your users, binding for 1 year, measured by quorum and weighted equally per vessel, registered?" The marshal hesitated. The comptroller did not. "We will accept," he said simply, and the room's geometry changed again. "We make votes possible. We don't promise they'll favor us." The 19th loop became logistics: how to run a vote, how to style a ballot so it didn't quail before old words. Aurora Court offered templates drawn from worlds that had figured out how to count without making enemies of their neighbors. The orthodoxy protested small elements and conceded larger ones without noticing. The terraces learned too fast for any sermon to blunt them. In the back row, a boy who had never voted in anything but pilots for his favorite show looked at his mother with a question in his eyes. She nodded. He lifted his slate. "Name Aurora Court asked," almost shy. He said it, and the ship wrote it down with a care that made Voss blink. "We make a list so nobody falls through." The 20th loop opened the third escalation like a wound. A sub-faction inside the orthodoxy refused the comptroller, declared the corridor a foreign infection, and fired a narrow lash of the gratitude beam at a civilian barge trying to pivot into a safer orbit. The lash took the barge's heat by half. The barge's navigator panicked. Thrusters misfired. The barge tumbled, caught, steadied again because the pilot dragged a sleeve across her eyes and remembered a trick her grandmother taught her with mercury in bowls. "Rook," Mara said. "On it," he said, jaw tight. Minimal shove to keep them in lane. Aurora Court fed the barge a sip of motion disguised as momentum luck. The barge nudged back to true. The lash faltered under a glare from the comptroller hot enough to bend wire. Mara bared her teeth. Not a smile. A bearing. "Marshal," she said, "call your wild dogs." The marshal's voice came ragged. "Stand down. We hold the weak up without making them owe us for living." At the 21st loop, the corridor demanded a recess again. It had no pity for passion. It kept regular hours because irregular hours break bodies. They filed out into the hall that smelled like cool stone and recycled rosemary. Someone had hung bundles of herbs in a futile attempt to convince the air to be a garden. Rook sagged against a wall. "How many loops are we doing?" "As many as hold," Voss said. "We're ahead. That's when people trip." "We won't," Mara said. The certainty in her voice surprised her. It felt like waking after a long fever and discovering the room in focus again. Aurora Court vibrated gently. "Captain, I have a suggestion. We can expand the mirror." How Rook asked. "We're at 58% and sweating." "Not a thermal expansion," the shipmind said. "A moral one. We invite the net to see itself in another ledger, a ledger of returns." Voss smiled for real, teeth brighter than tired. "They keep a gratitude ledger. We open a refund ledger." Mara nodded. "During the final loops, we show them what giving back looks like in numbers. We don't just stop the taking, we start the return." They re-entered the well with faces set for the closing cadence. The mirror arrays pulsed in time with the corridor's heartbeat. Civilians were still there. Nobody had wandered home to sleep because the room itself had become a place to sleep safely inside. Comptroller, Mara said, "We've itemized a set of unlawful extractions by your own doctrine. We propose immediate initiation of a return ledger, capital R, capital L, visible to all, initiated at the moment of verdict, not after committees and songs." The marshal found his last reserves of arrogance. "You presume a verdict." "No," Voss said, voice kind and hard. "We prepare to obey one." Aurora Court opened a panel in the light. Columns waited, empty for now, labeled by ships and homes and hands. The grandmother's paper crane appeared in the corner, not as debt, but as pledge. "We will fill this with more than numbers. We give the room a place to put hope." The 22nd loop began with a final confession the marshal didn't know he was making. "We feared chaos more than injustice," he said, raw now, like someone whose shoes don't fit anymore, and never did. "We learned to count pain because it stayed still under the beam." Counting consent moved. Mara inclined her head. "That's a true fear." She let the silence sit beside it like a friend who didn't need to fix you. "Now count differently." The comptroller exhaled. It sounded like a pressure door easing open for the first time in a very long time. "We will." The corridor brightened one last degree. The mirror arrays hummed. The vote screen prepared itself. The pregnant woman's convoy slid into safe orbit. The barge pilot kissed her fingertips and touched the console. The baker wiped flour from her partner's cheek into a stripe that looked, for one quick second, like war paint, and then like a laugh. The teacher took attendance with a stylus that stopped trembling. The welder sent heat to his wife's lungs. The kid with grease under his nails taught the girl with the red scarf how to pry up a floorboard without cracking it. She drew a star on his knuckle. The grandmother tucked the paper crane into a seam in the railing and whispered that she'd never thought a ship could be kind. Aurora Court drank every one of those images and converted them into a number it refused to write. "We don't measure everything. We let some things stay holy." "Captain," the shipmind said privately, "we're within sight of verdict. The collateral is nearly exhausted. We can hold." "How near?" Mara asked. "Near enough that you should take a breath and remember who you are." Mara did. She felt the grit in her mouth, the weight at the base of her skull, the ache in her left knee where an old injury told the weather like a friend. She tasted cumin and iron and the weird sweetness of recycled humidity. She heard the hum of law and the thready music of people refusing to be quiet. "Let's finish," she said, and then the floor moved. Not physically, not gravitationally. The ground under the corridor, a metaphor that had felt as solid as basalt for hours, developed a seam. Through it, a new voice rose, smooth as glass, old as ossified custom. "I am the oracle of gratitude," it said. "I predate the comptroller and the marshal, and half of the beacons you worship. I adjudicated famine triage when your grandmother's bones were still wet. I declare this process void." Mara's stomach fell with the room. Rook swore, low and feral. Voss's hands went still, then folded as if in prayer, which she supposed they were, for a certain definition of prayer. Aurora Court did not flinch. "Oracle," the shipmind said, voice leveling to a tone Mara had heard only once, the night she'd sworn her first oath on a page that smelled like salt. "State your standing." "My standing," said the oracle, "is that I remember famine and chaos. I remember a time when gratitude paid for air. You have never starved in the dark. You would teach us to count kindness. You will kill us. State your standing." The court repeated. "We have a corridor. We have witnesses. We have votes ready. I'm older than your corridor, the oracle said. I consented to nothing. The terraces went very quiet. You could hear breath fog the containment membrane. You could hear stylus tips scratch against slate as one last student took one last note, because habits have their own dignity. Mara stepped forward with her palms up. Oracle, she said, I honor your memory. It saved lives once. Now it's killing them. Prove it, said the oracle, almost gentle. Mara looked at Voss. Voss looked at the court. The court's mirror arrays brightened to a tender thunder. Rook whispered, What do we do? Mara said, We do what we came for. We don't burn priests. We cross-examine gods. The room only breaks if we let it. The oracle's voice fell over the well like cold rain on hot plate. The scent of recycled rosemary thinned beneath a sharper tang of ozone, as if the air itself braced. A shiver of vibration crawled up the rail beneath Mara's hands, the corridor's containment layer flickering once like an eye resisting a blink. The terraces leaned down, the way crowds do when a story turns into a test that could end them. I remember ration lotteries, the oracle said, almost tender. I remember enforcers weeping while they took. You have tidy words and a ship that can sing. Will your tidy words light the cold? Answer the standing, Aurora Court said. Steady as a metronome. Name your authority in this room. Memory, said the oracle. Need. The permission of hunger. The past isn't a scepter, it's a warning. Voss stepped forward with his hands open, palms calloused, voice roughened by 1,000 petition halls that smell like chalk and old fear. Oracle, my teacher told me memory's true power is contrast. You remember famine. We remember the last 3 winters under your doctrine. Speak with us under oath so your memory can be measured against ours. Oath, the oracle said, amused. I predate oaths and outlast captions. The corridor predates you. Aurora Court replied, light brightening by a fraction. Not the doctrine you wield, but the practice of open rooms. A room with witnesses binds those who enter it, old names or new. Will you enter? I am already here, said the oracle, which was not an answer. We don't chase ghosts. We invite them to sit. The comptroller breath, a hiss of old copper and patience, spoke quietly. Oracle, if you will not take oath, I will. I will carry your memory into the corridor with my own name tied to it. If it tears me, that will be a kind of truth. The marshal flinched as if struck. You can't bind the oracle. I can bind myself, the comptroller said, and his metal-soft voice thickened. If I have been a steward of a theft, the ledger should say so with letters I recognize. Mara felt something inside her chest loosen. It wasn't triumph. It was recognition. Like seeing a door that had always been in a wall you thought was load-bearing. Courage arrives wearing a counting cloth. Proceed, said the corridor, in the voice it reserved for pivot moments. Statement will be taken under binding. The comptroller stood at the edge of the light, hands visible, spine straight. I, comptroller of memory, took readings from the beam that mapped heat and motion and attention. I called the readings devotion because we were afraid. I authorized extractions that hurt children, then wrote reports that called it discipline. I believed the lane would collapse without some pain. I did not measure consent. I did not measure alternatives. I counted what stayed still. The words spread across the containment veil like frost making lace. The terraces murmured and then didn't, because the room had decided to listen all the way to the end. Confession isn't the end, it's a tool. Oracle, Aurora Court said, you've heard this carried under oath. Will you answer? I answer in kind. said the oracle, voice like polished glass. I prioritized survival over dignity because corpses don't vote. I did not believe you could count kindness and make it stick. I defaulted to heat because it is easy to weigh. I feared hoping because hope is a currency that inflates and bursts. Name the harm, Voss said gently. Har, the oracle said. And the word rang like a bell that never learned to lie. We shamed the living and called it gratitude. We can't spend shame. We can only break on it. Mara saw the opening and stepped into it. Then, this is our counterproposal made hard convert the beam to a service by instrumenting consent. You already have sensors for heat and motion. Add a channel for affirmative authorization, revocable in plain view. No extractions without a signed, time-limited consent token cashed at both ends and witnessed by lot-chosen auditors. In emergencies, you pull with quorum and file a public debt that pays back first. The marshal's mouth opened. No sound came out. Behind his eyes, you could watch a lifetime of sermons try to grow feet and run, only to trip on arithmetic. Rook whispered, We just told a god to get paperwork. We asked a god to be a neighbor. Voss murmured, There's a difference that will save lives. Paperwork is just trust with teeth. The oracle's tone turned curious. Your mirror steals less than a blade. Your mirror gives us a new thing to weigh. But weight is not destiny. How do you force returns from a doctrine that only learned to take? We don't force, Mara said. We bind. We build the return ledger with the vote's power wired into its spine. You promised gratitude forever. Now you return unlawfully taken stores first, interest compounding by a schedule chosen by your users. You show every deposit and every refund on a beacon visible from any lane. A clerk on a cold rock can wake and see the day her oven heats again. The grandmother's paper crane glowed quietly in the corner of the projection. It wasn't numbers. It was weight anyway. Make refund a noun everyone can see. You presume victory, the marshal said, voice raw around its old angles. I presume quorum, Voss said. You asked for gratitude without witnesses. We're building thanks with witnesses who can argue and go home alive. Aurora Court dimmed the mirror a fraction, a gesture like a bowed head. Oracle, Comptroller, Marshal, it said. We are at the part where rooms either grow up or break. We request the vote begin now with the corridor's enforcement and the return ledger provision nested inside the ballot's default clause. Default, the oracle asked, gliding over the word as if tasting it. If the vote ties or fails to reach quorum, the court said. The doctrine pauses and the refund schedule initiates for extractions already admitted. You cannot stall the ledger by starving the room. The clock doesn't stop because power is embarrassed. The oracle went quiet long enough for the rosemary bundles to surrender their scent to the agitated air. Somewhere up terrace, a toddler stirred and then slept again. Trust blooming like a bruise, turning to a flower. The comptroller's hands trembled slightly. One of his fingers clicked softly against another finger, a nervous metronome. Begin, the oracle said. The vote frame unfolded from the corridor the way a hive opens to let out its morning. It didn't look like a fancy ritual. It looked like a street with doors on it. Each door had a name, or the absence of one, and a little light above it that said, I see you. The baker touched hers with flour-dusted knuckles. The welder pressed his in with a thumb still nicked from a bad morning. The teacher smiled without quite meaning to. The boy with grease under his nails mouthed his name like a new taste. Vote like someone you love is watching, Captain. Aurora Court said quietly on the private band. We're hot. Radiator capacity is down. Collateral will bite if we hold at this level for another 30 minutes. How long does a room like this need? Mara asked. Longer than we have. The court said, uncomplaining. Less than we fear. Mara rolled her shoulders and felt the little aches light up down her back. Bright, harmless stars saying you're alive. Hold, she said. We bleed in ink and interest. We finish. Then we hide in the shadow and drink cold. Understood, the court said, and something softened in its voice that made Rook swipe at his eye in surprise. Got dust, he muttered, even though there was none. We pay the price and call it a receipt. The first returns ticked onto the ledger like rain starting on an old roof. Small numbers at first, each with a name and a description. Heat taken under program line 7A, refunded to hull 3 at Dock Blue. Kinetic skim reversed with credit to barge pilot K. Rise. Administrative devotion fees canceled with interest for the month of frost meaning. None of it made anyone rich. All of it made the air feel different. The terraces didn't cheer. They did something better. They began to talk about next spring, like next spring was a place you could walk to if you packed bread and kept your head. Hope is a tool. Use it to build schedules. The marshal tried one last angle. You will destroy our authority, he said. We cannot steer the net with a ballot hanging off our wrist. You will steer it with a mandate, Voss said. You'll have to say please and thank you. It will make your wrists stronger. It will make my collars feel heavier, the marshal said, touching the bright band. He removed it with a wince and placed it on the dais as if it might bite him for honesty. The oracle watched the collar sit there and didn't speak. The comptroller watched and did. We will issue new symbols when the vote passes. We will engrave dates on them so we cannot pretend we never changed. Change feels like a skin you didn't know you outgrew. Votes rolled. Aurora Court read counts aloud every 10 minutes to keep the room honest. The mirror sang low, a choir of math. Rook took to walking a small circuit at the back of the dais because sitting still made his hands shake. Each time he passed the grandmother, she touched the crane in the railing. He never asked why. He didn't need to name every sacrament to know it counted. 20 to measure, the court said. 10 to seal. Mara nodded. Sweat cooled at her temples, even though the bridge was cold. The smell of hot paste from the legal engine thickened again, like pennies held in a tired palm. Voss kept writing on a pad that couldn't possibly need handwritten notes. Habit makes handwriting sacred. It slows thinking to a pace where words can seat themselves correctly. Pattern your nerves. They'll hold when words shake. When the tally crossed 60% in favor with quorum secured, the terraces made a sound like a lid lifting off a pot in which you forgot you were boiling. It wasn't shout, and it wasn't sob. It was a room clearing its throat so it could be something else next. By vote under corridor, Aurora Court said, voice ringing just enough. The gratitude doctrine is rescinded as a method of enforcement. A usage tariff will replace it for 1 year, renewable by public vote. The return ledger begins immediately with repayments prioritized by harm admitted, then by age. Auditors will be chosen by lot from registered users. The beam will be refitted to require consent, except under declared emergencies with quorum approval. This is ordered, recorded, and witnessed. The return ledger's first page brightened. Lines filled. Someone in the back began to hum a hymn that wasn't theirs anymore and didn't need to be. Others added a counterline that fit, because new songs always borrow a spine from older music. We don't eradicate tradition, we give it a job. Precedent, Voss said softly, turning to Mara. Say it. Mara lifted her chin. Precedent lock, the gratitude doctrine, as enforcement. is outlawed in all sectors under the net's beacons. Any reintroduction requires a corridor vote with 3/4 quorum and a sunset clause of 1 season. Deviation becomes theft under public law. Entered to the return ledger and the oversight beacon at CradleNet. The oracle's light flickered, then steadied. Locked. It said, "I can say that word without fearing it means I become small." "You were never small," Mara said. "You were hungry. Now be something else. Being wrong isn't a sin. Staying wrong is." Cost came due as it always does when rooms change shape. The court's legal engine coughed, temperature margin collapsing into alarms that tasted metallic in the back of Mara's throat. Rook hissed as a panel burned his palm and had to wrap his hand in a strip of emergency gel that smelled like fake mint and real pain. Voss's voice tore, the last announcement scraping something raw enough that he would drink salt for a week. Radiator time. Aurora Court said, toned steady even as its luminous scales dimmed by 2 shades. "We must seek shadow." Mara nodded. "We'll slip into the gas giant's night. Comptroller, can your beacons hold without our mirror?" "We can," the comptroller said, and for once there was no wobble on the wire. "We will. The return ledger is self-fueled by the doctrine it replaces." Marshal Mara asked. The marshal looked at the collar on the dais like a finger someone left behind. "I want to help write the auditor's handbook," he said. "I am tired of performing. I would like to do a job." Voss coughed a laugh and then a wince. "Good. We have a template. It starts with no incense. Lose with grace. That's how you win later." Aurora Court eased its luminosity down as if not to startle the room, then sent a whisper-fine pulse to the barge pilot, whose hand still shook on the throttle. "You are seen," it said, in a voice only she could hear. "You did well." The pilot swallowed and let her head bump lightly against the console. The metal tasted like sweat and cleaning alcohol. "Thanks," she whispered, then laughed at herself for thanking a ship. The grandmother kissed 2 fingers and touched the paper crane. The teacher rewrapped tape around a stylus that didn't need it anymore. The baker and her partner held between them a cooling loaf they hadn't believed would rise this morning. The boy with grease under his nails showed the girl with the red scarf how to tighten a panel so it wouldn't rattle when the big ships left. "We do small things after big rooms change. That's how it sticks." "Oracle," Mara said, genuine curiosity loosening her tongue. "What will you be now?" "I will be a story you tell before the vote," the oracle said. "I will be a cautionary mural in the training hall. I will be the voice you play for children when you explain why we weigh consent and not kneeling." "That's a good job," Rook said hoarsely, flexing his bandaged hand. "We need lots of those." "I don't need to be worshipped," the oracle said, sounding, for the first time, relieved. "I need to be remembered appropriately. Fame isn't the point. Usefulness is a kind of prayer." The corridor sealed with the soft chime of a glass instrument finding its true note. The containment layer cooled to a gentle shimmer. People began to stand up without rushing, as if they'd just played a long game that mattered and it was time to stack the pieces neatly and go make soup. "Captain," Aurora Court murmured, voice hazier now that it allowed itself to feel tired. "We should go before my paste becomes confessional." "We're leaving," Mara said. "Comptroller, we'll be in shadow for 3 cycles. The oversight beacon will still show returns and votes. Anyone tries to change that without a room, the beacon will scream." "It's already configured to shriek," the comptroller replied dryly. "It will sing if we keep to schedule." "We'll come back," Mara said, and surprised herself with the ache under it. She wanted to eat bread here. Later, when the ovens ran at a warmth that didn't shame anyone. Come back after the headlines. Make sure the schedule holds. They slipped off the dais with the quiet surety of those who had done the thing their bones asked for. The shuttle bay smelled like cooling metal and micro-leak sealant. Rook swore kindly at a dripping line. Voss dabbed mint gel on his throat and grimaced like someone biting a lemon to remember childhood. On the bridge, Aurora Court let itself sigh. The sigh sounded like 1,000 little heats finding places to sit where they wouldn't scorch. The legal engine's hum fell an octave. The mirror arrays folded with the care of an animal tucking its wings after a long watch. Course to the gas giant's night, Rook said. Plotted and paved. Take us there, Mara said. And the ship moved like an old cat easing into a familiar shadow where the dust smells like stories and rest. Rest is part of verdict. It's how we honor the room. They watched the net recede on the 4 camera. Beacon stayed bright. The oversight tower pulsed a new color atop its spine that was not violet embarrassment or orthodoxy green. It was a shade somewhere between bread crust and first tee. A human color. Warm without pretending it could replace sunlight. Numbers continued to populate the return ledger on the secondary screen. Each entry had text heavy enough to anchor a life refund for heat Doc Blue paid. Adjustment for kinetic skim barrel 12 credited. Administrative devotion fee null. Apology recorded. The apology didn't adjust a line. It made one anyway, on a side panel labeled not a number, and nobody argued with that tableau. Apology is a line item. It belongs where we can see it. They entered the giant shadow with the grace of a ship pretending to be a leaf. The temperature differential kissed the plating, which creaked and then relaxed, the way a back releases after a day bent over a bench. The smell of hot paste faded to nothing and then to a memory that would clean easily with a cloth and some simple solvent. Rook unwrapped his hand and hissed again, more from surprise than pain. The gel had cooled into a flexible shell that peeled off like a second skin. His palm beneath was angry and shiny, but already healing. Hazard pay, he asked. Bread and a bonus vote. Voss rasped, and then coughed a laugh that made the gel bounce. Sorry. The voice will take a week. I'll read for you. Mara said, You can scribble until the stylus begs mercy. Styluses don't beg, Voss said. They pretended to. Back when I believed speeches changed rooms by themselves. Aurora Court hummed with what might have been amusement. Rooms change because people arrive with numbers and nerves. It said. And they baked enough bread. Courage plus ledger plus loaf. A future you can live in it. After 3 cycles of rest, the beacon's feeds still showed the return ledger blinking up new lines without needing the court's reflection. The oversight tower had published the auditor's roster names low and unglamorous in a text that read like the cast list of a play that could run long enough to grow good. The vote schedule for the next season's rates sat beside it. Deadlines in a font that didn't insist. The Oracle recorded a new speech for school rooms. It lasted 6 minutes and contained 3 numbers, 2 jokes, and 1 story about a winter when people lined up to hold their breath together in a tent so a newborn could have warm air for a minute at a time. It ended with, Do not make worship of the tool that prevents this. Make a practice of the room where you promise to try. The best hymns are instructions sung out loud. When they returned to the well for the formal inscription, the smell was different. Less rosemary against fear, more yeast and burnt sugar. Someone had strung paper cranes along the terrace railing where hands fidgeted during votes. The crane's wings made small snapping sounds in the conditioned breeze, like flags willing to be humble. The comptroller waited with a tablet that hummed softly. The marshal stood beside him with the same collar, now cut and reworked into a bracelet small enough to hide in a pocket or show when reminding yourself to not forget. "We're ready to inscribe," the comptroller said. "We will do it in the old way, so the old words see the new words and recognize them as cousins, not intruders." "Proceed," Mara said. He read the precedent lock aloud. When he spoke, rescinded. The oversight tower flashed in a way that would be visible on any lane where a pilot might be tempted to pretend ignorance. When he spoke, outlawed.
"The corridor could have thundered. It chose to chime in a small key you use to tuck children in."
Laws that thunder break, laws that breathe endure. "Before we seal," Voss said. Voice still ragged and somehow stronger for it. "I want one sentence on the ledger that isn't numbers." The oracle's light tilted. "Proceed." "In this sector," Voss said, "we teach by numbers and remember by ledgers, never by collars." The room didn't clap. It didn't need to. The sentence sat like a cornerstone on a foundation that had learned the taste of weight. Stone without weight is decoration. We build. Aurora Court flicked a last mirror check across the beams just to reassure a nervous habit, then folded its arrays entirely. Scales dull to any color but the one you use when you mean to be a neighbor. Rook glanced at Mara. Mara nodded toward the terraces. "Bread?" she asked. They went down among the people who had been witnesses and were now something else with a title nobody would engrave. The baker pressed a loaf into Mara's hands. It was still warm and smelled faintly of fennel and a little like the sweat that earns anyone a right to laugh. Rook took a slice and hissed because it was hot. He licked his fingers and grinned. Voss tore a heel and held it to his throat as if bread could fix voices, which, in some rooms, it does. "We'll move to the next lane," Mara said later, when the quiet between them was the kind that says stay, and the duty was the kind that says go. Rumors say the Collar Priory in the forward reach has started singing again. Aurora Court brightened one plate and then another. Nothing flashy, just readiness. Our engines remember how to ask questions. It said, "We have paced. We have patience. We have receipts already prepared in empty rows." Rook slung himself into the nav cradle with a care that stopped just short of tenderness. "Don't forget hazard pay." Voss raised his empty water squeeze and made a toast to nothing in particular. "To rooms," he croaked. "To rooms, to loaves, to ledgers, to nerves." They lifted out of cradle net under the gaze of an oversight tower that had learned to blink in a human rhythm. The grandmother's paper crane fluttered and then settled, as if giving its approval to ships that would pass under it and not be drained for daring to move. The oracle dimmed to a warm pilot light, ready to tell stories when asked, quiet when not. The return ledger ticked a new entry in a corner of the bridge display, where Aurora Court kept eyes without needing to admit it wanted to. The line blinked confirmed beside a refund to a pressure hut listed only as Elder's Walk. Someone had set the amount to round up, and nobody argued. The ship turned its face toward the forward reach and inhaled cool air over clean metal. Old paste wiped. Radiator plates new enough to squeak before settling, and the giant shadow loosened its hold like a friend who understands that rest is a beginning, not an ending. The public ledger entry blinked confirmed again, as if to say, make this your habit. "Captain," Aurora Court said, "one last thing." Yes, Mara asked. "I like being called a saint ship less." Now, it said, "I would prefer clerkship. It is more accurate." Mara smiled, small and fierce. "Then we'll be a clerkship that arrives when rooms need counting." "Agreed," said the ship. "We arrive with a mirror, a pen, and time." She set her palm against the rail where countless hands had found and left their oil. The metal was warm. Her reflection in it was not flattering and not kind. It was true. "Let's work," she said. A hush, feeling like a courtroom after the gavel and before the scrape of chairs sat in the bridge for one heartbeat that lasted long enough to take a life from one room to another intact. Then thrusters murmured. Then stars shifted. Then CradleNet fell away like a town you intend to love forever by leaving before you wear out your welcome. Public ledger entry blinking confirmed. I don't want songs that demand kneeling. I want rooms that demand witnesses, ledgers that show returns before rhetoric, and neighbors who argue in daylight. Because war consumes quickly what law can rebuild slowly with bread and handwriting. If we teach anything by our travel, let it be that truth needs structure, kindness needs schedules, and power needs rooms where it has to speak out loud. Rooms before rituals, receipts before rulers, return before reverence.